Boom.
Awesome. Well, I want to first of all thank you so much for joining me on the show this morning. I've been super excited about this conversation for so many reasons, but I want to start us off with what I hope will be a very fun and easy first question, and that is, how did you get into classics, ancient history, all the wonderful things?
By accident, I am one of those that sort of stumbled into classics during my undergraduate degree. I come from a very sort of STEM focused family, so I am 100% the black sheep of the family now, but they love it. It's great. So yeah, I have loved animals my whole life. So growing up, I of course was going to be a veterinarian. I think I went through a brief period where I was going to be a paleontologist, like all little kids do, and loving dinosaurs. But yeah, then it was I'm going to be a veterinarian. Then, as I sort of advanced through high school, I was like, well, maybe it's zoology or, animal biology related things like that. Then I realized that the slight hitch in my problem was that I hated math, like absolutely just did not like it. And sadly, one cannot go and become a veterinarian or a zoologist without, doing math and chemistry and things like that. You can't just take biology, which I think is, I have feelings about that now. So I kind of finished my high school diploma. And just as I was going into my final year of high school, I discovered anthropology. I'm like, well, this is kind of cool. I sort of discovered this unbeknownst to me fascination with other cultures. So when I started my undergraduate at the University of Guelph, it was in anthropology. I had never even really heard of classics. Like we had an ancient history course at my high school that I didn't take. So like there is no sort of pre foreshadowing that I was going to fall in love with this. But yeah, my first year of my undergrad, took a classics elective, loved it. Took another one in my second semester, and then yeah, by second year I had switched into it. My concern was the languages. I'm not a natural linguist. I have a love-hate relationship with them. They're probably too mathy. I don't know. And one of my profs assured me in his very kind, adorable Dublin accent that Latin was not that hard, that Latin would be fine. So I signed up for 830 Latin. Latin was hard, but by then I totally had the classics bug and switched my major to classics. And I haven't looked back since. I completely fell in love with it, language woes and all.
Well, I think
I
that's
swear,
super
I swear I
relatable.
was, oh, sorry, I was gonna say, yeah, no, I swear my prof was secretly a leprechaun and he just like, those twinkling eyes and Dr. O'Cleary, he was wonderful. He was an amazing mentor throughout my undergraduate career, but I still have not quite forgiven him for telling me that Latin wasn't that bad.
It's okay. I've spoken to enough people who I think said they felt a little lied to about certain things, certain aspects of the language training. I myself, well, I also have a love-hate because I like language, but I think I trended more toward, well, I thought etymology was cool. I like learning roots, but actually having to learn, sit, apply, read, it depends. It's like it's very
Yeah.
hit or miss. If I like what I'm reading, then I'm like, okay, I can do it. It's fine. If I don't, then I'm like, oh, so I really, I mean, I can't imagine sitting trying to read like Tacitus in Latin. I just would be so bored. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. For everyone who loves Tacitus in Latin,
He
I'm very sorry.
Tacitus, he's got his place, we need our Tacitus. But yeah, I loved learning the languages. I hated being tested on them, very much the test anxiety. So, and definitely was, gravitated more towards the Greek than the Latin, I think, because it was the second language I learned, which, yeah, I just felt a bit more comfortable with it.
I mean, fair. I mean, goodness me. I also am a Hellenist, so I don't think you'll get any argument from me.
Right?
Now, one thing that I wanted to know was since you were coming from this sort of STEMmy background, veterinarian and all, when you made the switch, so I've seen a lot, basically the body of your work is really cool because it's like involving equine studies and all these wonderful things. And I was a horse girl growing up, and I've ridden since I was maybe 10 or 9 or something. I don't even remember. It's been so long. But like when you were going through the veterinary process, did you think about becoming like specializing in doing sort of like equine veterinary studies, or because where did the horse stuff come in, or were you just a lifelong rider and you were like, you know what, once I switched, I'm gonna stick with horses in some way?
So I like you, I started riding when I was very young. It was like there was this moment in time where my obsession randomly swapped from dinosaurs to horses. Don't know why. I seem to recall being on an escalator in a department store with my parents when I was like 8. And all of a sudden, apropos of nothing, going, I want to ride horses. And they looked at me like we lived in the suburbs outside of Toronto, though. where on earth is this coming from? And so I nagged them and nagged them for like 2 years. And finally, for my 10th birthday, I got riding lessons as a birthday gift. I'm pretty sure they were convinced that like the porta potties and spiders and poo would scare me away. It didn't, because here we are over 30 years later. I am the inveterate horse girl, like just full on, what does Aristophanes call it? Hippomania, lifelong, sufferer of hippomania, of mad love for horses. So I was a horse kid long before I was a classicist. And, I mean, when I was still thinking of maybe I can be a veterinarian before realizing that was certainly not going to happen. I don't know that I was like, oh, I want to be a large animal vet or a small animal vet. It was more like, I just want to work with animals and study animals, and I'm obsessed with animals. So yeah, it was never, and I do have friends who went on to become veterinarians who I rode with when I was younger. And most of them became small animal vets because being a large animal vet is just so physically taxing and demanding, and getting called out to fields in the middle of the winter when it's like minus 30 Celsius, whatever that is in Fahrenheit. And there's a blizzard and a horse has done something stupid and you're trying to fix it. And so I don't know if I would have gone into equine medicine, or if I would have been like, well, I'll have horses and I'll ride horses, but I want to sort of keep my professional obligations and then my hobbies and on the side. So yeah, I'm a lifelong horse person. And as you said, my research focuses on equine history, equids in the ancient world. But again, that was never an intention. Like I think I wrote one paper on horses when I was an undergraduate. It was for a philosophy class, I think, about the ethics of horse racing. And I was actually going to do my master's on the religious propaganda of Alexander the Great. But my supervisor, Waldemar Heckel, he's like, I don't like that topic. I'm like, well, I just moved across the country to do a master's degree with you. What do I do now? And he said, well, you like horses, you ride horses. And so he suggested that I do something on Macedonian cavalry, to which my response was, I don't know anything about warfare, never studied warfare. But I guess I know something about horses. So he gave me a recent publication on ancient cavalry. And as I was reading it, I was like, yeah, like, honestly, who thought this was a good idea? It's been like, if you know anything about horses, they are afraid of absolutely everything. Like the story about Alexander the Great's horse, Bucephalus, being afraid of his own shadow, that is legitimate. Like I have had horses spook at their own shadow. I have had horses run away from the sound of their own fart. Like it's coming out of you and you were running away. They'll walk past something 30 times, and the 31st time it's going to murder them. So my brain immediately went, with my knowledge of horses and horse training and horse behavior, why did we do this? Like, why did we think, let's take this animal and ride it to war? And how the heck did it work? And so that's where, again, kind of by this bizarre series of circumstantial things and having to change a topic, I just fell into this area of research and was very fortunate throughout my graduate career and then my early career as an early scholar or a sort of junior scholar to have a lot of support for it. Horses are everywhere in the classical world and the ancient Mediterranean world, and people have to talk about them and engage with them, but they don't necessarily know much about horses. So there's been a huge sort of wave of support from the classics community for my work, which I'm very grateful for. I mean, I go to a conference like, hey, it's the horse girl, but there's a respect for the fact that I'm the horse scholar, not, oh, she just likes ponies. So yeah.
Oh man, I mean, that to me at least, that is like the coolest thing ever because I always want to be like the horse girl, but usually that's said in the very sort of, oh yes, she rides, she has a passion, she just likes them. They're nice to go ride. I couldn't imagine how cool that would be though, to be like the horse girl, but also be like, and yes, this is what I'm an expert in. This is what I do my work on. Let me tell you. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
my parents are like, wow, she actually found a way to make a career out of horses that pays money. Like, because we all know, like, a career in horses is very difficult. They're giant money pits. It's a difficult industry to be in. So, yeah, I mean, again, bizarre, the fates. I don't know. I don't know who smiled upon it, but I somehow carved some sort of professional career out of being obsessed with horses.
I mean, it's true though. I mean, I think when you think about maybe going into horses, you usually think, okay, well, I got to go into racing. And then you're, yeah, but what are the chances my horse is going to be good enough to make it to like the Kentucky Derby? So you're like, okay, well, that's kind of far-fetched and hard, especially since it's like, talk about nepotism being a thing in Hollywood. I'm like, nepotism in horse racing is just as intense, if not worse, because it's
Yeah.
the same like 5 trainers and the same 4 jockeys. And you're like, so every Kentucky Derby, you're sitting there and you're like, okay, now they're going to run through this trainer and how he's been the person for the past 20 years. And maybe he has one rival. And you're like, okay, that's kind of boring, but sure, great.
Yeah.
So, okay, I knew off the bat, or I had a feeling that I should not ask you how you got into horses and classics because it was going to be some weird twisting journey that nobody can replicate. And I was proven correct that it would be, I mean, there's no like, let me just go to school to focus on ancient equine studies. Here's A, B, and C. So luckily I can dispense with that idea because you've already sort of trampled all over that.
I will say though, there is like across the sort of different historical disciplines and archaeological disciplines, there is actually a growing body of individuals who study equids. So there's the Equine History Collective is a research organization. There's a journal called Chiron, which is the International Journal of, I think it's like Equine History Studies. So in like most disciplines, you're starting to find at least one or two people who their specialty is equines or equids. And so like there's a growing body of us. So you never know. Someday we might be able to like, here's a class on, you know, equine history, which I think would be super cool. And I know some of my colleagues at other universities and other disciplines do offer them. So, and I try and fit horses into my curriculums whenever I can. But yeah, so it's changing. You never know. Stay tuned.
Okay. Okay, it's changing, and I hope it does, because I mean, if that was a class available to me, I would have taken that in about 5 seconds. But sadly, in the middle of mid-Missouri, that was not going to be a thing. So I do want to get into it because I read somewhere, I don't remember. I see, I read so much, I don't even remember where I see these things. But I did see that I believe one of your degrees, I don't remember if it's the master's or the PhD or both, focused on the Greek war horse. Now, I want to talk about that because, well, yes, as you were mentioning earlier, horses, very interesting things. They get scared a lot. Bringing them into war would be interesting. And I want to start with a really simple question, which is, and this comes from me being the horse girl growing up and having a really good friend from school who I would beg, please come, let's go ride horses. I grew up in Chicago, again, city, so I had to drive like an hour outside the city to find some place that would let me ride. And so I was desperately begging her because I was like, I just want company. I don't want to go alone. Would you please come ride? And she was desperately afraid of horses. And I would be like, I don't understand this. Why? I mean, yes, they're big, like like just they're 1,000-pound animal, whatever, like they're huge, I get it, but like they're so gentle. And she wouldn't believe me. And so then this sparks this immediate question of, okay, well, we have cars, we have these things nowadays, so you don't need a horse. But in the ancient world, what happens if you're like desperately afraid of horses, and let's just say by extension ponies, donkeys, these things you kind of need to get around because, well, Greece is mountainous and kind of terrible to walk all around. So what do you do if you're scared and you're like an ancient person?
I mean, that's a good question. I think there's probably a few responses to that. I mean, one, as you point out, like a lot of us live in urban environments now, and yeah, into the early 1900s, horses would have been horses, mules, donkeys, the equines would have been a fairly common presence in even major cities because we still relied on them for transportation and to deliver goods and things like that. But certainly from sort of the post-war period onwards, at least in sort of the global north, equids kind of disappear from urban areas and replaced by mechanized means of transport. But if we think back to the ancient worlds, they just kind of would have been a constant presence. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone was like, oh yeah, cool, it's a horse or a donkey or a mule and it is walking in front of me, or I have to walk around it to get to the shop that I want to go to, or do the thing that I want to do. I'm sure that there were people that still had trepidation around them, because for as much as they were present, that doesn't mean that everyone is engaging with them and interacting with them and understanding them. I mean, certainly horses in antiquity were very much the prerogative of the elite. They, to be quite frank, are not the most practical, like in terms of doing tasks that are necessary for human survival. we weren't using horses for that. They weren't being used for agriculture at that point in time. That doesn't really happen until the Middle Ages. So they're being used for war and for racing and for prancing around and looking cool, kind of like driving around in your sports car, right? The animals, the equids that we use for actual pragmatic stuff like building infrastructure, doing agriculture, transporting heavy goods long distances, that was the donkeys, the mules, so cross between a horse and a donkey, and of course oxen. So horses in particular, I think, always had this kind of almost otherness to them, where only those who were of a certain socioeconomic class would have really interacted with them. And then obviously the grooms, the staff, the enslaved persons who were responsible for taking care of the animals. And even then, we get these not so much from the classical period, but I think from some sort of medieval period documents and stuff, ideas that you have these kings, you have these sort of members of the nobility who are expected to be able to ride horses because it is a marker of your status, especially as an elite male, but they're not very good at it and they're kind of awkward. So even this idea of, yeah, you're expected to be on a horse because you're a king or a prince or a lord or a duke or whatever, but still it's your staff who's primarily taking care of the horses, and you just have to get up there, and you may actually be quite intensely uncomfortable about it because, I mean, they are big. Ancient horses were small, but they're still, big. I mean, they still weigh, 700, 800, 900 pounds, and they're unpredictable and they're incredibly powerful. So that fear, whether it's a learned fear from a bad experience, so being kicked by a horse, bitten by a horse, run over by a horse, falling off a horse, or just the foreignness of the horse to your own life and the way that you look at your day-to-day experiences can definitely create a fear. Just like some people are just intrinsically afraid of dogs, right? Some people are afraid of dogs because of an experience, and others just something about that animal makes me uncomfortable. And unfortunately, I don't know that we can trace when those things happen, but to say that no one in antiquity was afraid of horses and other equids, I think would be an untruth. There certainly would have been people who were either afraid of them or at least apprehensive around them, or not familiar with their behavior.
Humans, we don't change really that much, do we, over thousands of
No,
years?
no. I mean, neither do horses, which is why they're such a fantastic living artifact to be able to use, right? A horse today, I mean, sure, we have specialized breeds and they come in many more shapes and sizes and, with specific jobs and roles, far more specialization than would have existed in antiquity. But the basic mechanics of how a horse moves and the basic behavioral elements of a horse are the same as they were millions of years ago when this species first sort of emerges on the grasslands of our planet. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting because I think there's also this perception from movies, certainly, I mean, media, but also the idea that like, oh, how did they use horses in the ancient world? I mean, you have all these great tales of, yeah, cavalry and stuff where you're charging in on your nice horse, but also from antiquity, we have so many pieces of art and other depictions of horses being used in the traces, right, with chariots. And what may sound like a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it because I get to, is, you know, like if you were an ancient person and let's say you had the option, because obviously not everyone had the option, would somebody prefer to, if they had a chariot, use that with their horse, or was it preferable to ride them the way sort of we kind of think everyone liked to?
So, I mean, that's very much sort of just a chronological question. So, I mean, there's debate as to, when the horse was domesticated, which in the grand scheme of things was relatively late, long after sort of cattle and sheep and goats and sort of the major agricultural animals. Even after donkeys, horses are probably domesticated about 5,000 years ago. And recent archaeological evidence is suggesting that there was actually two phases of domestication, sort of initial phase that didn't quite finish, and then a second phase where we do get what we now recognize as our domesticated horse. And so, I mean, they are first domesticated as a food source. That seems fairly clear for their meat and their milk. And then, when we start to see horses being included in burials, so this again is Bronze Age. It is with chariots. So it seems like in terms of status, function, we were driving horses, but that doesn't mean that people weren't riding. Riding a horse requires way less technology. All you needed was some means of steering them, and that doesn't even have to be a bit in their mouth. There are other ways to steer them. So, I mean, you probably have people riding at the same time, but when we think of horses then being used for very public functions, so whether warfare or like processions, travel, it is originally in chariots or wagons of some sort, wheeled vehicles. And then we get a transition to predominantly mounted riding, so riding on horseback. You know, and like the Iliad, for example, is a really interesting, sort of case study for this, as it is for so many things, because you have that mashup of like, Bronze Age and not Bronze Age. So you have Bronze Age chariots, like this is a chariot driving culture, but then they're not really fighting from their chariots, right? I've described it as the Homeric taxi service, where like you get in your chariot, it delivers you to the battlefield, you have your big verbal throwdown with whichever opponent you pick to find out if you're guest friends and you're worthy of fighting each other, and so on and so forth. Then you do your thing, and someone dies, someone doesn't, and whoever's still alive gets back in their chariot and like goes away. And so then we get these vases, black figure vases, like archaic period vases that kind of seem to show the same thing, but with horseback, where you have almost like a squire on a horse, and then he's leading another horse, and then the rider has gotten off and has his big hoplite shield and is fighting in hand-to-hand combat, and then presumably getting back on his horse after. So originally we are using chariots, at least for things like war, travel, transportation, and then it shifts to mounted warfare. And that happens in the Near East, it happens in North Africa and Egypt, it happens in the Mediterranean world. And in part, it's because, I mean, chariots are just, they're not particularly practical. Ancient chariots, they're not comfortable really to ride, and they don't have shocks. We hear at the Battle of Gaugamela, between Alexander the Great and Darius, Darius, that Darius wanted to use scythe chariots on the battlefield, and so he had to clear it of all obstacles beforehand, right? Because bouncing over rocks or holes in the ground is going to bounce the chariot off balance or cause a structural failure. So yeah, chariots kind of fizzle out, certainly in the late Bronze Age and into the Archaic period, and just becomes more pragmatic to ride. And with riding, you're just more adjustable in terms of techniques you can use, tactics you can use on the battlefield. And you need fewer horses, right? A chariot needs at least 2 horses. You can ride a single horse. And then where chariots do persist is in sport. But racing chariots, like they are very dangerous. Like there's nothing there. Like you are literally perching on this little wicker platform. Like, there's not even a solid that you're not standing on like solid wood. You're standing on like this sort of wicker woven platform. And then you have this tiny little, I don't know, wall kind of at the front of the chariot, but it only comes up to about your knees. So that you're only using for racing, and they're incredibly dangerous and difficult to balance. And I mean, charioteers must have had cores of steel to be able to do that. So yeah, in reality, riding becomes more prevalent, but we do see some contention around the shifts. There's a letter from a king in the ancient Near East, and he writes to his advisors. This is when horses are first coming into the Near East, and says, he asked them basically if it would be considered shameful for him to be seen in a chariot pulled by horses as opposed to a chariot pulled by kunga. So kunga are a cross between domestic donkeys and wild asses like onagers. They're what you probably see on the standard of So they're the first animals used in war. And so that's what had pulled the royal chariots and royal transport devices in the Near East. And so now these horses arrive, and he's like, can I use those? So we kind of see these constant shifts and changes, and they're driven by societal customs and beliefs. But once we start riding horses, the riding of horses for war and travel and transport and processions and sport and all of that stuff becomes predominant, and chariots kind of become this sort of anachronism, weird archaism kind of thing.
Oh, fascinating. Well, okay. You probably have guessed. I do want to eventually drive us toward Alexander, and Bucephalus is one of the most famous examples. But to get there and to help the audience kind of along. So in this transition, this very sort of long, slow transition between chariot and then riding astride on horseback, I mean, I've got to imagine that, it becomes a lot more personal when you are up on your horse and you have to develop this sort of chemistry with them so that they're comfortable with allowing you on their back. I mean, even today, when we talk about sort of breaking a horse, which I really hate that term because I don't like the idea that we're breaking them, but fine. You know what? I can't change many years of using this term. But when we talk about, how do you get a horse to feel comfortable taking a man upon his back? obviously the relationship changes between humans and horses, having to allow this change. And so, kind of before we even get to something like Alexander and Bucephalus and their relationship, was that a complicated process? Like, how did it go when, how would you characterize the change in relationship between just here, I'm going to hook you up to this thing and then you'll learn to pull it, but you don't have to have my weight, and then let me on your back so I can ride somewhere?
Well, first, if it makes you feel better, we can also use the terms starting and gentling as well. Because again, I find breaking a horse to be weird. So I kind of use the term starting a horse because you're sort of starting them in this process of becoming a working animal in some capacity. So, I mean, I used to think that, riding a horse obviously it does create a very deep bond and relationship between the horse and rider. And this has implications for how we think about ancient cavalry or even just cavalry in general, pre-mechanized warfare and soldiers and their horses. But having driven horses as well now, so I did get a crash course in driving a few years ago. You also still need that really sort of deep bond there as well, because when you think about it, when you're riding a horse, there is an intimacy to it because, of course, you're using your body to balance and control and move with this animal. But that also gives you a lot more tools for being able to manage the animal, right? Because I can use my voice, I can use my hands, I can use my legs, I can use the tension or relaxation in my body, I can use my weight, especially on smaller horses, to be able to sort of influence them or calm them down or get them more pepped up. Whereas when you're driving a horse, you really just have your voice, you have your hands, and then you have like a driving whip. So you almost need to have a greater degree of trust there, because when you're driving a team of horses, if something goes wrong and those horses panic or decide to not listen, or it can be much more serious, because if they bolt or have a meltdown, you have this your vehicle, so, and there's two horses instead of one, so you still need to have that very in-depth relationship and understanding and trust, but you're using it, I suppose, in different ways, and you don't have that same physical contact. And I think that's where the difference is between driving and riding. When you're riding, you are physically touching the horse all the time. And certainly in antiquity, where they didn't have saddles and stirrups, you are sitting bareback on the horse. So your skin is in contact with their skin. So we know that the Greeks rode bare-legged. They didn't have breeches and things like that. Sometimes they'd throw a saddlecloth on, but by and large, you are literally in contact with the horse. And so everything that you do, that you think, that you feel, your horse can feel, because they are very intuitive to our anxieties, our tensions, all of that. So if I'm tense, they're going to pick up on it. And that prey behavior will come to the fore, and they'll get very anxious and wonder why they're anxious. And even sort of the way that you do things when you're riding a horse bareback versus, say, with a saddle and stirrups or driving a horse, it's all different ways of biomechanics and thinking about your body and their body. So in terms of how you get the horse to do this, I mean, every horse is an individual, right? So we say that, some horses are just born trained, where like they just don't care, they're just so chill and calm, and maybe they've just been exposed to so many different things as young horses before they enter their working career, that like you get on them for the first time and they're like, yeah, like, yep, okay, we're going to go for a walk now. And then others are, certainly more anxious or agitated, or they've had bad experiences and they can be a lot more explosive. So it is very much about reading body language and understanding the horse and knowing how far to push things, when to sort of pull back. So, I mean, no one who's sane is going to be like, yeah, I'm just going to pull this horse out of a field who's never been ridden before or handled before and fling myself on its back and we die or we don't. I'm sure there are people who have done that, but that's not going to create a good working, great partner that will probably end in many visits to Asclepius and the local physician and prayers to Poseidon or something. So it's a long process. So introducing the horse to the tools, and some of our ancient texts, they talk about this. I think it's like Virgil, and maybe it's Columella, like they talk about how even with the young horse, the foal or the young colt, to just start like hanging stuff around them, like hang the bridle in their stall or clank your weapons together or make these sounds when the horse is young before they have to work, so that they're familiar to them. And this is something we do with our horses when we train our modern day war horses. It's like getting them used to these sounds, right? Banging things and dragging things and jumping up and down and waving swords around, so that it doesn't bother them and they get a positive reinforcement, right? I do this and then you get a treat. And so it's gradually building up that confidence and that trust before you then eventually climb on their back. Because for a horse having someone on their back is profoundly weird, because as a prey animal, the primary predators that horses would face would tend, like big cats and stuff, like they would tend to jump on them. And so having this thing sitting on top of you, and then with a horse's range of vision, they can't really, they can't see behind them. They can see about 340 degrees, but not right in front of them and not right behind them. So they're catching like glimpses of you up there out of the corner of their eyes, but they're not watching what you're doing. So it's got to be profoundly weird. And there are all these steps of building that trust ahead of time that come into place before you then eventually swing your leg over their back.
I mean, so these, I mean, maybe it's just for horse lovers, but I think they're the most majestic creature. Truly, I had the pleasure of riding one when I was in Greece 2 years ago, and I got to ride one into the ocean. And my guide like took this amazing picture of me, and I was like, "Oh my God, I'm so proud!" And then I, of course, found some inspirational quote about a horse. But all this to say, I do feel very connected and close with the horse, even though it's like it's not even mine, right? And so that I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so cool." But then we have someone like Alexander come along, and there's this untrainable horse, unruly, sort of the myth of Alexander, sort of calming Bucephalus and building up this relationship. This is going to be kind of a two-parter. So the first one is we have many famous descriptions and depictions of Bucephalus, and they talk about how, great he was, and Alexander himself likes to say these adoring things about his beloved companion. But the kinds of horses we had in the ancient world are different from the ones we have now, as you've said. I'm curious, what was considered special back then? Because I think, as like a 8-year-old, right? If you would have asked me, what kind of horse would you like? I would have said, I want like a white Pegasus type of horse, or I want the big black one, or I would want something really specific, like a Palomino, because it's so beautiful. What a striking combination. Did people back then care about what your horse looked like, or were they like, no, I don't care? Like, you know.
Yeah. So I am actually now writing a book on Alexander and Bucephalus. So I signed a contract for that in the late spring. So hopefully, fingers crossed, the manuscript will be done by the end of next summer. So yes, stay tuned. I'm finally writing my Alexander and Bucephalus project that I've said I was going to do for a very long time. Finally have a chance to. Yeah. So I guess first in terms of for people sort of putting into context what the horses were. So they were not big. We can talk about Hollywood later, but they're not. They are small horses. They're basically what we would now say pony size. So a pony is not a baby horse. It is an equine that is under a certain height. So we measure a horse in hands. A hand is 4 inches, so the width of your palm. And you measure them from when they're sitting on flat ground, you measure them from the bottom of their hooves, the bottom of their foot, to their wither, which is the big bump at the base of their neck. So in modern parlance, a pony is anything 14.2 hands and under, whatever that converts to in inches, because remember, math is not my friend, and a horse is anything over that. And then there are pony breeds, and they physiognomically are a bit different than horse breeds. So just the way their proportions. So the proportions of their legs to their body, to their things like that. But then you can also just have small horses that are pony size. They just look a little bit different from ponies. But yeah, they were small. Large horses are very much a modern, like probably the last 200 years, if that or so, development. And because it comes down to need and nutrition, large horses are far more work to take care of. They eat more, they poop more, there is way more strain put on their body, they take longer to mature and be able to work. But there are reasons why we did create large horses, and for agriculture and then for sport, really. But in antiquity, they were small. With that being said, we do have references to particular regions that were renowned for producing horses. So I don't like to use the term breed. I think it's a very anachronistic term. Again, it can be a very problematic term, and it's a very modern term. So I don't talk about horse breeds in the ancient world. I talk about types of horses. So there's a Mediterranean type of horse, and there's a North African type of horse, and a Central Asian type of horse, and Near Eastern types of horses, because they're being created by their environment. So now we, just like with dogs and horses, like we specialize breed, right? We say, I want a horse that can do this job. And so I'm going to do all this crossbreeding and all this genetic stuff to create an animal that can run the fastest or jump the highest or pull the more. And then those horses will get imported around the world to whoever can buy them or has a need for them. In antiquity, I mean, yes, we get some specialized breeding of sort of wanting to breed the best to the best, but people aren't really trying to change what their environment has created. So the Greek world produces horses that are adapted to an arid climate, that do well in mountainous environments, that don't need a lot of really rich food because that's going to be difficult to obtain. So you tend to get these sort of hardy mountain breeds, which are small and narrow and often gated. They actually often have a specialized way of moving, as opposed to the Central Asian steppe, where you need horses that are small and hardy and can exist in freezing cold conditions and boiling hot conditions and run for miles and miles every day. So we get these types, but even within those types, you then have regions that are better adapted or better equipped to breed. So for example, in the Greek world, it's Thessaly, right? The most renowned horses come from Thessaly, and they were branded. So they did brand their horses, but the brand isn't a breed brand, it's a regional brand. So for example, it's coming to Bucephalus. So his name means ox head. There's lots of different arguments where this comes from, some far more fantastical than others. So some say that he had like a mark, like an ox's head on, like a star in the shape of an ox's head on his forehead. Some that he was stubborn like an ox, some that he had a head like an ox. And there are these fantastic medieval manuscripts that are the story of Alexander, the history of Alexander. And like some of the depictions of Bucephalus are just wild. Like there's one, it's a French manuscript from I think the 1500s. And by the end, like he starts off looking kind of like a horse. And by the end of the manuscript, he has an ox's head with like orange eyes, a unicorn horn, and a peacock tail. So the ox head gets taken quite literally sometimes. The most logical explanation is that he does come from Thessaly. So Philonicus brings him up. He's the horse trader. And so that he's branded with the Bucephalus, the ox head brand, which was from Larissa, I believe. So that's the most likely. So Thessaly bred the most sort of renowned horses in the Greek world. And so they would certainly fetch a higher price. But Bucephalus's price, if we believe it, of 13 talents is a little over the top. Like, that is ridiculously expensive. Like according to the cavalry records from Athens, we have these clay tablets that were part of cavalry evaluations, and they record the value of the horse. Like 1,200 drachma was an expensive horse. So 13 talents is like, it's absurd. And it's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but there's clearly something about this horse he's probably very well bred. It's possible that he is of imported bloodlines. So, I mean, this is speculation, but, imported Persian bloodlines, or who knows, right? There's clearly something about him that has made him worth more. But of course, the horse is only ever worth as much as anyone will pay for it. But there's something that is making Philonicus say, I can charge a ridiculous sum of money for this horse that no one can ride. This great, aggressive stallion that is amazing, and you're going to give me all of this money to buy him.
Wow. Well, part two of this question was I wanted to know whether there was something special about the way he looked, because essentially the second parter is, well, Alexander obviously became famous by taming this horse, and everyone was super impressed, if we are to believe kind of the historical record. But I'm curious, so by him sort of taming the beast, right? Was it actually as impressive in history as we think it is?
So I have a lot of thoughts about this, hence the book. So the famous version of this relationship that we have comes from Plutarch's Life of Alexander. I think it's chapter 6, where, so Philonicus is the Thessalian horse trader. He comes up to Pella, where Philip's, Alexander's dad, is like, I need some new horses. Macedonia bred really nice horses as well. It was another major horse breeding center in the Greek world, but Thessaly had the best horses. And so they have this big horse fair, and sort of Bucephalus is left to the end, I suppose, as the pièce de résistance. And they bring him in, and, Philip and his buddies are all sitting around the riding area and watching, and they bring this horse in, and like no one can get on him. He is rearing, he's biting, he's kicking. Philip's best horse trainers, and they can't get near this horse. They're like, we're not even going to try and get on that horse. Like, he's going to kill us. And so Philip says, get rid of it. Like, what are you doing? Do you want to kill me? Like, are you trying to kill the Macedonian king? Like, I don't know, is this some Athenian plot or something? And so Alexander, who we don't know how old he is, he's young. He's probably like 11, 12. Like, he's a, bratty adolescent prince, pipes up because he's there with his friends. And he's like, oh, there they go, getting rid of the best horse here. And, Philip, we know that Philip and Alexander, if we believe the sources, have a tense relationship. And so Philip's like, shut your mouth. Like, what, you think you know better than all of my experts? You're a kid, you're an adolescent. And he's like, yeah, I do. And so in response, and Philip's like, so like, what are you going to do if you find, like, you've challenged me, you've challenged my authority, you've challenged the authority of my professionals, your elders, your betters. So what are you going to do if you can't ride the horse? And he says, I'll buy it myself, which of course he can't do. He just doesn't have 13 talents. But what he has recognized, if we believe Plutarch, and as I've hinted, there is certainly factual truth behind horse behavior for this, is that Bucephalus is not an inherently violent, aggressive, savage, unrideable horse. Presumably, he has been ridden before if they're bringing him for someone to ride. You're not going to put a person on this horse for the first time in an arena in front of a crowd of people. He's afraid. So he is afraid of his shadow. He is spooking at his shadow. And the added tension of them being on show and being in an unfamiliar place and surrounded by all these people, and sure, the pressures, the tensions from the people trying to sell him, like, they do pick up on all of this. And so his reaction to fear, some horses will shut down and some horses will just explode, right? And they'll try and flee, which is probably what he's doing. But because he can't flee, because he's being held in place, he's got a bit in his mouth and he's being manhandled, his reaction then is to violence, is to shift to violence, because he can't get away from the thing that's scaring him. So the only thing he can do is try and get it, to attack it, to get rid of it. So Alexander has recognized that Bucephalus is afraid. And so he turns the horse into the sun so he can't see his shadow anymore, talks to him quietly, calms him down, takes his cloak off so he doesn't spook the horse, and then jumps on, and then does something really important that, again, horse people will get, is he doesn't then try to make the horse behave. He lets it run, right? He lets him run and run and run that adrenaline out, right? Run until you are not afraid anymore, until all of that and anger and violence that's been bubbling up inside of this horse, it's just gone. And he gets that adrenaline release. And then he can turn him around and he rides him back, into his shadow, and comes back. And Philip's like, oh, you're going to conquer a great kingdom, right? And it's this very sort of apocryphal, prophetic thing, because he does go on to conquer this big kingdom. But there's a lot in there in a little paragraph. And when you look at the Macedonian cavalry in particular, I mean, Philip starts it, and then Alexander sort of brings it to fruition. Like, he does change cavalry combat. He does change how horses are used on the battlefield. It's one of the reasons why he's so successful against the Persians, who are themselves a horse culture with a longer tradition of horses and a greater supply of horses and different types of horses. Because when you read the accounts of his battles, he seems to understand horse behavior, and this is implied in the Bucephalus story. And so he uses the horse itself as a tool, as another sort of piece of the puzzle on the battlefield, and using horse behavior and horse psychology to basically psych out or face down his Persian opponents. So he seems to understand the horse so implicitly that he's able to use horse behavior and horse psychology and physiology to his advantage on the battlefield.
Wow, that's such a huge advantage. Just knowing horses. Being a horse person, I know that's insanely cool, especially for back then. I mean, it must have felt a bit like Alexander was out here playing like 4D chess when everyone else was playing checkers, right? Like, oh yes, I
Well,
understand this creature. Let me just do this.
and I mean, from a historical perspective, this is one of the things I'm investigating in my research. It isn't this weird one-off. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Alexander, there's many things that are interesting about Alexander Bucephalus, but one of the big things is, they're really the first horse-human pairing and coming out of the classical world that's real, right? Before that, all of these famous horse-human pairings we have are mythological, or human-equid pairings we have are mythological. And then with Alexander and Bucephalus, they're real. And we have all of these accounts of Bucephalus. Like, he pops up in all of the sources and all of these stories about, how he would kneel down for Alexander to get on him, or when he was dressed for battle, only Alexander could ride him, and a tribe steals him, and Alexander threatens to end them unless they bring him back, and then naming the city after him when he dies, and all of this seemingly over the top stuff. But they then become mythologized after, right? When you go into the Alexander romance tradition and the medieval traditions, it's like, anytime you see Alexander on a horse, it doesn't matter what that horse looks like. That's got to be Bucephalus, because we can't imagine him with another horse. And this almost creates a precedent for great generals, that they have to have this horse, right? They have a horse. And then the boy in the horse story becomes quite relevant in pop culture. So if you know the Walter Farley story, The Black Stallion, that's 100% inspired by Alexander and Bucephalus. Like in the movie version, they actually tell the story of Alexander and Bucephalus at the very beginning. And so the kid's name is Alec instead of Alexander, and the black. Because for whatever reason, we always presume Bucephalus was black, even though he appears as many different colors in the visual tradition. We don't really know what color he would have been. But yeah, so there is like this, it echoes, over thousands of years, like Alexander and this specific horse with his own specific personality and quirks and idiosyncrasies, even if he does develop a peacock tail, apparently. I'm still trying to figure that one out, but the unicorn thing makes sense, but the peacock tail, we'll figure that one out. Stay tuned.
That's interesting. Okay, so I have so many more questions about just the research alone. And this is not even getting into the Roman stuff and the use for like the games and spectacles and the gladiatorial arena. But of course, time is always the enemy.
We can do a part two.
Yes, please. We need a part two because I do want to address some of the spectacle aspects. So okay, that'll be a second one because I want to make sure in this episode, at least, we have enough time to I guess for the general public who may be listening, I want to get to some of the pop culture media stuff because there's so much with horses. So, oh goodness me, where do I start? Again, I knew this was going to be a hard episode because I was like, I got to rein myself in, and that is so hard. So I want to start with, okay, you know what? I know exactly where I'm going to start. So we're looking at horses. We're looking at horses of war. We're looking at all of these things. And horses are included. They're a very popular thing to have in all this different type of media. Now, one of my favorite films, like of all time, is the Steven Spielberg War Horse adaptation from the play. Now, anyone who knows horses also is watching that and is probably cringing, like, oh my God, you're gonna have this animal charge into like gunfire. They're already scared of a lot of things, or the potential to be. So who thought it was a good idea to like ride them into like a machine gun, essentially? But with stuff like that, that we can see with sort of the more modern stuff with guns and shells and blah, 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 blah. We also have a ton of media like the Alexander movie, the 2004, whatever. And you see this representation of the Battle of Gaugamela and you're like, oh my God, but also riding horse in like, not machine gun, but still there's a line of dudes and you're like, oh my gosh, who thought this was a good idea? So when you see these things portrayed on film, does it just drive you crazy? Or are you like, okay, it's in the name of like entertainment, so I get it, but also like, really?
So the tactics, not so much. So that was my master's degree, basically how to train your warhorse, your Greek warhorse. So I do actually train horses to do these things. So I do experimental archaeology. And so I do a lot of what I do is myth busting, sort of breaking down these preconceived notions we have about what ancient riders could and couldn't do, and the horse size and the lack of saddles and stirrups and all of that, and being like, no, it didn't matter. You could still do all of this stuff. So you can very much train horses to charge into a formation. It has to do with behavior and herd dynamics and the sort of individual personalities of the horse. That's why you ride in formations, and you can put the bolder, braver horses at the front and the more timid horses in the middle. And so because they're a herd, once the bold horses start going, the rest are just going to follow. That's just that herd behavior. They don't want to get left behind. So you can actually like push a horse through a phalanx. What I've discovered, and of course, we do all of this very safely. We don't have points on the spears or anything. But if the horse can get his head and his shoulders, his or her head and shoulders, kind of between the spears, it'll just go, because it's like, I can fit. And then I am apologizing profusely for my knees, just bashing people as we go through. And even like a walk or trot, you are spinning people out of the way. And, as infantry, coming back to what you were saying earlier about people being afraid of horses, it's going to take a pretty brave person to stand there and not want to shy away as 500 horses gallop and sort of canter towards you. They're not doing this flat out, the flat out Hollywood gallop is wrong. They're doing a controlled canter, not a flat out racing gallop, for many different reasons. But like, that is a lot of mass coming towards you. And again, with particularly bold horses, they will sense that, right? If there are people at the front of that line that kind of just like flinch away and make an opening, a trained horse will go for it. Like, and I'm just gonna crash through here. And then again, just that mass, the force and the mass and the basic physics of it, even with a small horse, I mean, you are just spinning into these people and breaking it open, and then the rest of the horses follow. So you can 100% train horses to do it. Again, it's a process, and you have to understand each individual horse, and there has to be a very strong bond between the soldier on the horse and his horse. Like, these are not disposable. Soldiers had very close personal relationships with their horses. They had to trust each other. So the tactics, 100%. I mean, sometimes you're like, oh, why is the horse just standing there while you fight? That's not going to happen. But the charging into a line, yes, I mean, that is a doable thing. I mean, the scene where like Bucephalus rears up in front of Porus on his elephant, it looked good, and there are the elephant medallions, I suppose, but yeah, that is actually reasonable. But I mean, what Hollywood always gets wrong is the horses, and for a long time, like, this drove me absolutely crazy. I was like, oh my god, like, why is there always a Frisian? All right, so Frisians are the big black hairy horses. So in the Alexander film, Bucephalus is a Frisian. So Frisians come from the Low Countries, basically what is the modern day Netherlands. They are a medieval development. They don't do well in a Mediterranean climate. There's always Frisians. And then there's always like the Spanish and Portuguese horses, the Andalusians and the Lusitanos. And so for a long time, I was like, oh my God, why can't they get the horses right? Why can't they just have small horses? But I have friends who work in the film industry, and just sort of realizing that you have to have very specially trained, very specialized horses for film work. And there are only so many outfits in the world that do. And they tend to have certain types of horses because they're flashy and they might be more trainable for certain tasks. And so that you just get them. And so I'm kind of learning to live with that and be like, okay, like they're not going to have an appropriately sized horse. In Kingdom of Heaven actually did okay. There is a Frisian in Kingdom of Heaven, but in terms of the horses that were being ridden by the Arab side, the Muslim side, they are actually like look like little Arabs and barbs and appropriate types of horses. But yeah, so I've come to terms with they're using modern horse breeds or medieval horse breeds to represent ancient horses, because that's just what these companies have. So I just grit my teeth. I'm like, fine.
I mean, it's fair. Also, I mean, a very minute portion of the population, I feel like, are looking for, is that the right kind of horse? I feel like most people just want, oh, it's pretty.
And then you will quite frequently see saddles and stirrups. Like, they'll try and like throw a cloth over the saddle. And again, that's not accurate. They did ride bareback. You get a form of a saddle by sort of the late Roman Republic, but it doesn't have stirrups. It has 4 horns. They're really cool. I have one. They're fun to ride in. But yeah. But then again, you're thinking, there's not a lot of people in the world who are comfortable riding bareback, and insurance and stuff. So it's those little things that you kind of, over time, I have learned to live with. I'm like, all right, I will just not gonna look at that. It's fine. It's better than the actors falling off and hurting themselves, I guess.
It's true. I mean, I figured that's what would be the case. I had the pleasure of speaking with Lindsay Allison Jones, who consulted on the Eagle film. And I remember in my conversation with her, I did ask her about inaccuracies, and she said, Roman saddles did not have stirrups, and she said she really did try to push for them not to have stirrups, but the insurance company had an absolute just aneurysm over the thought of allowing their actors to not do that. So she was like, okay, I gotta let that go. So I suspect, yes.
And you get a lot of actors who will say, like, on their CVs that they can ride.
They're terrible at riding. Are you kidding?
And some of them will be good. The majority of them are like, well, I know how to pet a horse, or I know how to sit on a horse and look pretty. So again, to be like, okay, well, now get on this horse bareback, or we'll give you a saddle, cover it in cloth, but take your stirrups away and go gallop towards that camera. No. So yeah, it's one of those things that we just, unless we create some sort of riding revolution. I mean, I spend most of my winter riding bareback because frankly, it's a lot warmer, because horses are very warm. And the farm where I train jousting horses and do sort of medieval horse stuff, we start almost all of our new riders, they start bareback. But a lot of places can't do that because of it, like riding schools and stuff, like insurance, corporate, it's just not going to allow it. So yes, we learn to just smile and nod.
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of very famous horse charges, cavalry charges in cinematic history. I mean, we've got Lord of the Rings, who did so many great ones.
And the riders were all women dressed as men.
Yeah, I know. Isn't it great? Right? It's like my favorite fun fact. I'm like,
Yeah, they have to get all these women and give them beards.
I know. I was like, the makeuping is just
Great.
insane, but you know, it
Love it.
made sense. So you're like, oh,
Yep.
I love that. So yeah, so we have these great cinematic charges through so many different types of films spanning, you know, different ages
Yeah.
of whatever. Do you have a favorite charge or great sort of cinematic horse war something scene?
Ooh. I mean, not gonna lie, like the Battle of Helm's Deep, where like Shadowfax appears in the glowing ray of sun, who is an Andalusian, by the way, Spanish horse, and then they all come like galloping down and charge. I mean, that is cinematically, that's pretty impressive. Like and I think I can enjoy it more too because I'm like, it's fantasy. But yeah, that one, like in terms of just the sheer, I think, impact that like a charge of cavalry. I mean, I know that there's infantry and stuff too, but there's just this whole sort of coming forward. And I mean, the charge of the riders of Rohin as well. I mean, it's just, it really, I think because they're not trying to be historical, that they are inspired by historic cultures, the Norse cultures and things like that. It just allows you to appreciate the power and the beauty of a cavalry charge without going, but that's not what that would look like, or that's not what that would have been. And you can just sort of understand the skill that went into it, but also kind of that unspoken communication that had to exist between all of the horses and all of the riders who were charging, and the awe that it must have created, right? Just the sheer shock and awe of having these horses just thundering towards you, and the way that the horse and rider kind of get carried along together in like this wave of energy and focus and deep, just a trust that had to exist between them, that it's impossible for us to fathom. I mean, even as someone who rides horses all the time and does all sorts of different things with horses and has ridden horses all over the world in many different situations, that I am intrinsically depending on you to keep me alive and vice versa. Yeah, I think seeing it in those great cinematic sort of masterpieces, those fantasy masterpieces, really, I think brings that home in quite poignant ways.
And with that, do you have a favorite individual portrait of like one person and their horse or a horse? And I'm thinking, you know, there's so many different ones you can, I mean, it can run the gamut, right? I mean, one of my favorite ones as a kid growing up, I was like, I love the relationship between in the animated Spirit movie, Stallion and Cimarron, with his like Indian friend. I was like, oh my God, it's so cute. And it's like actually kind of like a real relationship with a stubborn horse. It's so playful and cute and funny and totally dramatized. But yes, do you have a favorite individual person and horse relationship?
I mean, if we're talking like historically, obviously Alexander Bucephalus, like bam, totally my favorite. But trying to think from like a pop culture perspective, I mean, the original Black Stallion, right, with Alec and the Black when they're stranded on the island, and he's trying to tame this again wild, troubled, traumatized stallion. It's like I'm a kid hanging out like in this idyllic beach island, running around in the ocean with this horse, and we just magically learned how to trust each other. I'm like, that was pretty, like as a kid, like I wanted to be Alec. I mean, maybe not the being shipwrecked and stranded and losing my dad and stuff like that, but like having this just intense bond with an animal, and doing these incredible things with that animal, and the idea that no one else can ride this horse and it's my horse and you're so great. I think that was quite formative for me when I was a kid, sort of wanting to be, yeah, like Alec in the Black.
I mean, that's a good one. I remember when I saw the relationship in Warhorse with Joe. I mean,
Yeah.
Joey is an MVP, like unto himself. But when you see his relationship with all the people that he sort of interacts with, you're like, oh my gosh. And they all, you know, just fall in love with him. And obviously, it's no doubt due to his excellent upbringing, excellent training. But it's just so sweet to see. And so all the time, I know I'm like, oh, I'll never be in this situation, luckily. But also, I was like, oh, I want a relationship like this. He's so nice and he's so cool and it's so emotional and it gets me, you know, tearing up every single time without fail.
So I saw the stage. I was lucky enough to see the stage production in Toronto many years ago now. And I mean, so they're the big puppets. So I mean, in the film you have real horses, and in the stage production you have puppets. And at first you're like, oh. But by the time you're like halfway through the production, like you forget, like they have done such an amazing job of producing these puppets and mimicking horse movement and sounds and behavior that by the time you're halfway through, you're like those are real horses, real horses. And like by the end, I mean, like just like heart, like you're just like, oh, and my dad is like, I'm like, Dad, are you crying? He's like, no. It's just I have allergies. I'm like, you don't have allergies. But it is like like the sense of horse that comes through in the production is just so vivid and visceral that it's as emotive, if not even like more emotive, because you're not seeing a specific horse. It's a horse. It could be any horse, right? You're not looking at the horse that they've cast in the film. It's the concept of horse. And so it really resonates with you, especially as someone who has loved horses my entire life. Like it really resonates with you of like, that could be that could be one of my horses. That could be a friend. It could be any horse that I have felt a connection with. And oh my God, like that would just be such a gut-wrenching experience to go through.
I know, believe me. I often like to prep myself and say, well, I don't cry very often when I watch things. And yeah, human things are very sad. And okay, I might get a tear. Without fail, though, anything with like horses on film and I'm crying. I mean, watching Seabiscuit got me crying and
Yeah.
feeling a certain type of way. And I was like, what is this? This is just
Secretariat
what?
and yeah, like all of the, yeah. You're like,
Right.
ah,
Anything with
got the
this like
feels.
valorized horse, and you're like, I love it, and I'm crying. Yeah.
I
It's
showed Black Beauty, the sort of one of the more recent versions of Black Beauty to a friend once, and they didn't realize that it was about like animal cruelty, and like they got so mad at me. Like the scenes with Ginger where she's like being abused. Spoiler alert! Like, oh my God, why did you not tell me that such horrific things happen to the horses in this movie? I'm like, it's a movie about animal welfare and also poverty and social injustice and various and sundry other things. But because I taught the book in a class for a few years, but I'm like, yeah, it's not. I don't know why everyone thinks it's for kids. It's not.
that'd be like the last thing I recommend to children. Honestly, there's so many other great horse things you
Yeah.
can recommend for kids, but that
But
one,
also, it is an amazing book. If you've not read Black Beauty, read it. Like there is so much to unpack there about gender and slavery and social inequalities and animal welfare. Like, yeah, it all told by a horse. Like it is a masterpiece of social discussion. So
and watch the movie with care. Like
yeah,
warning, it'll make you cry, and it's a very hard watch. It's a good one, but
it's a good one.
yeah,
But
yeah. So okay, for the people who may be listening who really wanted Rome and Roman things, I very much apologize that I could not cram that in. There's
we'll
just
do
too
Rome.
much to get through. So we'll do Rome in a
We'll
part
do a
two.
part two.
But as kind of like a peace offering to my Roman listeners, I will ask one question on the depiction of horses in ancient Rome, and that is with like ancient hippodrome scenes, like something like Ben-Hur, right? When
Mhm.
you see all these sort of violent horse races, and you kind of worry and go, well, did they portray spikes on that wheel? Is that going to hurt the horsey? What's going on there? So I just want to know how terribly inaccurate, accurate do most things that include some sort of ancient horse race appear to be? I mean, does it just drive you crazy because you're like, no, that wouldn't happen, or that's dangerous, or that's unwise, or is it like, well, yeah, that's right, but also
So the chariot racing scenes tend to be pretty good. Even Ben-Hur. I mean, they wouldn't have had scythes. They wouldn't have had spikes on the chariot wheels for the racing. We do hear of those in warfare, but not in racing. And chariot racing was inherently violent and dangerous. So we have all sorts of tombstones from epitaphs from the Roman world for dead charioteers. You know, Scorpus, who was is probably one of the most famous Roman charioteers. He won like just buckets of gold. Marshall complains about it, how he gets paid nothing, and Scorpus wins a race and gets like all of this gold and all of these adulations. I mean, he dies, I think, in his 20s, right? He's like the short-lived darling. I think one of the epigrams is like he's the short-lived darling of the circus. We have epitaphs for child charioteers who were, like 12, 14 years old and dying in accidents. We know that intimidation tactics were part of racing. So you had the four factions, the blues, the greens, the reds, and the whites. And you might have multiple drivers from each faction in a race. And so you'd sort of have like your celebrity drivers and maybe more junior drivers. So there are totally tactics. There are also mounted individuals attached to each faction who we see in circus mosaics. And it's like our best guess is that they're kind of like outriders who are sort of yelling updates to their drivers because you can't see anything because it's dusty. The horses, I mean, the most dangerous would have been the four-horse chariot race because they were yoked for a cross, so that is quite wide. And the outside horses are really only controlled by reins. It's the center horses that are actually attached to the chariot. So there is a lot that can go wrong. The chariots themselves are very light and flimsy to a degree. I mean, they're well constructed, but if something smashes into the side of them, or if they get pushed against the spina in the center of the track or the walls on the outside of the track, that is going to cause a catastrophe. Again, they don't have shock, so if you hit something at the wrong angle or you hit another downed chariot or charioteer or horse, they can go up in the air and flip over. The charioteers themselves carried a knife at their waist because they would, for the Romans and charioteers in particular, would tie the reins around their waist because the races were quite long. It was multiple laps, so it's a lot longer than, say, the Kentucky Derby, which lasts for a couple of minutes. So their hands are getting sweaty, and so to make sure they didn't drop the reins, they would tie the excess of the reins around their waist. But that meant that if they were in a crash, they literally had seconds to hack themselves free before they're dragged to a horrible end. So we probably don't see actually the degree of chaos and violence and terror that actually happened on the racetrack. And we know that charioteers were incredibly superstitious, and they're not just superstitious about their own, like, the physical well-being and their ability to control these horses, but the spiritual, magical, supernatural side as well, because we have just masses of these cursed tablets, and they're very nasty things, these cursed tablets, these defixione, cursing charioteers and their horses, because the Romans were literally bonkers about chariot racing. Like, the closest approximation I can ever come to is like a South American or like European country during the FIFA World Cup, when they just go insane and will like set things on fire and smash store windows and riots because their team has lost, and say horrible things about whoever lost the game for their team. I'm thinking of David Beckham here. Like, that is probably the closest approximation to understand the sheer and utter fanaticism in the Roman world for chariot racing. And then that all was sort of played out in the incredible violence and bravery that we see on the racetrack. We know gladiators are violent, but we often forget about just how violent chariot racing was, not because they're intentionally trying to kill each other, like the cursed tablets you are, but just the risk inherent in the sport. And it blew gladiatorial combat out of the water when it came to popularity. Like, again, we think of gladiators because of pop culture, but the Circus Maximus held over 200,000 people or 250,000 people, which is considerably more than the Colosseum. So yeah, the Romans loved their chariot racing. Charioteers were huge celebrities, but they walked a very thin line between life and death.
Would have been interesting to be back then. I don't think I'd want that job. As interesting as it sounds, yeah, wouldn't want
maybe
that.
take care of the horses, because they were whole
Yeah.
industries, right? These faction stables. We have, again, inscriptions listing all of the people who are employed by them, but it is this massive industry that is central to Roman society. But yeah, definitely not a job for the faint of heart.
Nope. Okay, well, man, I don't
We'll do part
hate
two.
having to. I know. I was like, okay, I'll have to cut it there. But
All horses
I
all the
do
time.
have, right, all horses all the time. Absolutely. So, okay, I kind of end the interview portion with a couple of final questions. And the first one is, when you were grad student, undergrad, whatever you want to use, did you attend office hours?
I did as an undergrad, and then as a grad student, I was a TA, so I had my own office hours, and I always encouraged students to come. And of course, I would go and visit my graduate professors as well. So yeah, I totally attended office hours. I was just a massive, over-enthusiastic nerd. Like, you couldn't get rid of me. I lurked.
Oh,
I was one of those
same.
people that like lurked in the hallways. And now I'm like, oh my God, I mean, they must have driven them crazy. Like, ah.
I don't think I realized how creepy that was
Right.
until
I
after
know.
undergrad, because I would like wait in the lounge and then sort of watch the hallway for when professors would kind of walk in and be
Yeah.
like, "Hi, let me just pop in," and then probably be like, "Oh, I need to get
Or
work
like, oh,
done."
I've got grading to do, or emails to. Yeah, I was 100% that student as an undergrad. Like, just,
Nice. Okay, good.
yeah.
And do you have a favorite, I don't know, conversation moment, something fun that happened to you during an office hour, either as a student, or you can say from your experience as an educator yourself. But yeah, any fun moment you'd like to tell us about?
Mm. I have lots of bizarre ones because of what I do and what I teach. But yeah, I suppose some of my favorites. So I'll, with my ancient civ classes, so I have reproductions of lots of different kinds of arms and armor. Like when I got hired onto my tenure track job, like I used part of my startup funds to buy an accurate reproduction of a Greek hoplite shield. Don't know what my dean made of that. Like it's 25 pounds, it's 3 feet in diameter, it's got Pegasus on it, lives in my office. But yeah, so one of my favorite conversations I had with students, it's actually when we were teaching online during COVID, and I was doing my Greek Civ class and, telling students that, yeah, I've got all of this stuff. And normally I'd bring it into the classroom, but I can't because we're online. They're like, well, you must have it though. Like, is it in your house? I'm like, yeah, it's downstairs. Like, can you go get it? Which I'm like, I'm glad I'm not teaching in pajama bottoms right now. So I can run downstairs and grab it and come up, and I'm like trying to show it on the camera and they're all nerding out and getting really excited. But then I think it was that same semester, or maybe it was the next semester. And it was like an 8:30 a.m. class. And those are terrible. And again, it was still during COVID, so teaching online. So the shield was down in the basement. I have 3 cats. One of them, Snorri, handsome, probably about 2 brain cells. And he had somehow during the night gotten himself stuck under this shield. Because like it's got the dome, right? So go downstairs at like 6 in the morning. He's like a deranged tortoise, just flailing around under this shield. We don't know how long he's been under there, and like lifted up. He's urinated all over himself. And so before teaching my class, I had to give this cat a bath. Never bathed a cat before. So I finally come on, and I'm sure I'm just like incredibly disheveled looking and trying to explain to my students what my Monday morning had looked like because my cat got stuck under a 25-pound Greek infantry shield. And I then had to bathe him. And I'm like, yep, and this is your very professional professor. Yay. So yeah, when you study animals and have animals and work with reproductions of things, weird stuff happens. Weird stuff.
That's wild, and I love everything about that. And
I got to run my graduate supervisor over with a horse, and he was terrified of horses. So that was like my revenge for my cromps. He stood in line with a Sarissa, and I got to like run into him, and he kept trying to avoid eye contact with my horse, which just didn't work. Because then my horse sensed the weakness, and off we went for Waldemar. So
oh my gosh. Okay.
yeah,
Wow. This
on
is
that note.
just insane and
Folks,
amazing.
don't run your supervisors over. He agreed to this. All right. It was part of he agreed to it. I got to put him on a horse too.
So what you're saying is you can run them over only if you get their permission.
And it's for research. And you have ethics approval. Don't forget the ethics approval.
That too.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's definitely one of the more fun things that I think I've heard on the show. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Oh, I want to think about that the rest of my day. Also, like Sarissa, you have a Sarissa. It's powerful and amazing, but also it's very long. And wow, there's a horse. Yeah, interesting odds there. Yeah. So anyway, at the end of each podcast episode, I ask if every guest will read Shelley's Ozymandias poem. And this is because this poem has been one of my favorites, or my favorite poem of all time, since I probably first read it in, I want to say like high school, but I honestly can't remember if it was high school or college, but I think it was high school. And this poem has been cited as something super influential, as super beautifully written. It's been used in a lot of pop culture, and like, wow, there's so much with this poem. So much going on. And so after you've read the poem, you could just give us your thoughts and like, what do you think about this thing? Do you agree with people who are like, yeah, this is the greatest thing ever, or not?
Okay. So do you want me to like read it out loud or just read it?
Yes, read it out loud, please.
Okay. All right. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Ooh, that is good. You know what it makes me think of? Like, just right off the bat, there was in Egypt, there was the statue that, in the Greek and Roman world, they were saying was a statue of Memnon, the son of Dawn, who dies in the Trojan War, and that it would sing in the mornings, like as the sun rose, and it would make this wailing sound. And so it became this place that people would want to visit when they were doing like the ancient version of the Grand Tour. And I think it's like Hadrian actually orders it to be fixed and then it stops wailing. Like it just makes me think of that, this idea of this colossus that's kind of broken, because they figured that's why it wailed, because there was a crack in it somewhere. And but it's in like the sand, and it's this imposing thing that like speaks to you and tells this story of its creator and its past and even what we want it to be, right? This idea that we have to attach something that we know. And for the Greeks and the Romans, it was Memnon, that we attach it to this. And yeah, so it makes me think of like this actual work, this colossus that I think was actually one of the Ramseses or something like that. But they make it this famous character from the Iliad, and it would speak and it drew these crowds, and people would leave graffiti on it that, you know, I'd been here and I saw this and I heard it sing, and they would write these little epigrams and little mini poems about it. So yeah, for whatever reason, that's what it makes me think of.
Yeah, well, that's a very astute observation because the Colossi of Memnon is one of the elements that inspired my podcast's original cover art. So
Nice.
popped it in the
There we go.
sand because I was like, that's it. And it's true because Ozymandias, right, is just the Greek name of Ramesses II, I believe, his throne
Yeah.
name, which in the Egyptian, I think, is Usur-Maatra or
Hmm.
Usur-Maatre. So that's a cool fun fact if you didn't
Cool. I
know
didn't
one
know
today.
that.
And yeah, I love this because not only does it make me think of sort of the power of monumentality and legacy. I mean, obviously, right, this king thought that this statue would be standing in perfect condition forever, just like his civilization. Both were buried under sand for many moons, shall we say. And I mean, it's also quite a revolutionary poem. I mean, Shelley was writing it in 1818 when the statue of Ramesses was found in Egypt, and because colonialism was being brought to the British Museum, and he got very inspired and decided he was going to write this beautiful sort of poem in honor of the statue which was coming. So that I suppose also is a thing in and of itself. But anyway, sticking with the themes of legacy, monumentality, kind of what all this says, the last question I ask every single guest on my show is if you think about our culture today, do we have a type of a modern Ozymandias, something that we think is like so great and amazing, it'll last forever? But like realistically, will future humans agree with us, or will they look back and be like, what were those people thinking? They're insane. That wasn't great.
I think it's coming at this from like a super broad existential perspective. I think we think that we will, like us, not necessarily us physically, like me as an individual, but us as in like this society, this culture, this social construct that we live in. You know, we seem to be so adamant that what we're doing is the best and it will somehow endure and have this amazing legacy and be all encompassing and never fade. But of course, in reality, we know that cultures rise and change and collapse and fall and shift all the time. But I think we just, whether we, I don't know why we do. I'm sure there's lots of reasons, psychological reasons we could dig into it, that we think that what we have created as a 20th, 21st century tech-tastic, you know, innovative culture, global culture, that somehow this will just endure because it's so great and it can't ever be surpassed or it can't ever collapse. Yeah, I think we have the ego to think that it's us.
I would not disagree with you. And that's a great answer. And I did kind of lie because there's one final question, but it's super, super easy. And that is, where can people find you if they would like to email you, ask you a question, ask you about maybe coming to study with you, or just follow the work that you're doing? Because, hey, they love animals. We love animals, right?
Yeah, so I'm at Mount Royal University, so I'm an assistant professor in the Department of General Education. So if you look me up on the Mount Royal website, you will find my email address. You can totally send me emails. I love getting emails from people who are interested in horses and history and Alexander and things all over the world. I mean, I am on social media. I haven't used Twitter, X, whatever we call it, in a long time. I go on every so often and like post a picture of one of my animals, but that's about it. But and then yeah, my social media I sort of keep more to private settings. But on Instagram, I am academic_equestrian. So look me up on there if you want. But yeah, email is 100% the best way to get in touch with me. And like I said, just go to Mount Royal University, mtroyal.ca. look me up and you'll get my contact, my email address.
Perfect. Well, I will link those more public facing things in our show notes. And I will also put your academia page because I do know I have seen somewhere that you have one.
I do, and I occasionally remember to update it. It's like once every couple of years, I'm like, right.
It's okay. We all do it. We all do it. So
and there's
whatever's there, you can
a
find.
bunch of stuff on YouTube. I've done a lot of recorded talks and sort of hybrid talks. So if you look me up on YouTube, there's a bunch of animal and horse related things that'll come up from the little short snippets to longer lectures. So yeah.
Perfect. Great. Well, I will put as much as I can find in the show notes. And with that, I would like to thank you once again for coming to talk to me. And we
Having
have to have
me.
you on for a part 2.
Yes, please. I'd love to talk more about like sport and yeah, in the Olympics and Roman chariot racing and all that stuff. So for sure.